Hello, and welcome to Echoes of the Forgotten Earth, a quiet place where curiosity lingers and science is allowed to take its time. Tonight, we're slipping far, far backward into an era at once recognizable and otherworldly. Picture a planet wrapped in chill, where colossal fields of ice unfurl over continents, where titans tread pale grasslands under a thin winter sun, and where our own kin crowd near coals, shaping blades and meaning from bone and stone. This is the age of ice. Not a single shiver in time, but a long breathing epoch that lasted millions of years and sculpted the world beneath our feet in ways we're only beginning to understand. Settle yourself. Maybe you're listening close to midnight with only the soft machinery of the world for company. Maybe you've come hunting a calm current you can float along while learning something true. Either way, let's move slowly. There's no hurry here. The cold was patient, and so shall we be. Whole lives unfurled while the planet shifted by inches, and almost no one sensed it happening. First, a simple truth. It wasn't one endless deep freeze. It ran in pulses, a repeating cadence of long glacial chills interrupted by gentler, warmer interludes we call interglacials. Over spans of tens of thousands of years, Earth's climate swayed back and forth, nudged by quiet changes in the planet's path and posture, by tilts and wobbles that altered how sunlight fell. Those slight adjustments to light were powerful enough to pull seas away from their shores, raise bridges of land, and sweep entire biomes in and out like slow-motion tides. But we'll save the mechanisms for a moment. See the world instead. You stand where someday we'll call it Northern Europe, or North America, or Siberia. No skylines here, no forests on the horizon. There's a rampart of ice, hundreds of meters thick, stretching beyond sight. The air is parched and keen, snow-scented and still. And yet the scene is not empty. On the white plains drift herds of woolly mammoths, their scimitars of ivory catching the pale light. In the Americas, giant ground sloths rumble over the drifts, while saber-toothed cats lie low, muscles strung tight, teeth gleaming like polished bone. Farther toward the sun, beyond the ice's reach, rivers still run and forests still cling. And in those warmer refuges, people survive. They trail the herds, they drive stone-tipped spears, they circle fire and share what warmth the world will allow. They don't know a label like Ice Age. For them, this is simply living. And here is the stranger thing. The deep past was not a planet sealed pole to pole under glass. While the north lay armored in ice, the equatorial belt stayed warm enough for rainforests and deserts. Life bent, life moved, life endured. The earth in those days was colder, yes, but also wilder, sharper, full of contrasts. The tale begins long before people stride onto the stage. For millions of years, the planet has swung between cold and warmth, each swing scratching notes into stone and soil. We've pieced it together from the whispers of old air trapped in ice cores drawn up from Greenland and Antarctica, where each thin band holds bubbles from a vanished sky. They show us the frost didn't fall like a curtain in a single night. It crept. Glaciers advanced like a tide you only notice by coming back to the shore after a lifetime. Forward, pause, retreat, forward again, stones ground to powder under their weight. As the ice thickened, it reshaped everything it touched. Mountains sharpened into serrated spines. Valleys were planed and deepened. House-sized boulders were shoved across whole countries and left like forgotten luggage when the ice relinquished its claim. Walk today across parts of Scandinavia, Canada, the northern United States, and you can still read the script. Lakes gouged by ice, valleys in the shape of a U, lone rocks abandoned hundreds of kilometers from their birth. The oceans fell, too, more than 100 meters, as water locked itself into those continental crowns. Coasts marched outward, continents swelled. Asia reached fingers toward North America, and the two clasped hands across a land bridge we now call Beringia, a frozen causeway across what later became the Bering Strait. That bridge did more than redraw maps. It altered destinies. It let animals and people spill between worlds and reverberate across ages. Stand there in your mind. Wind razors over tundra. The snow drifts, but never settles. Caribou and mammoth pass in patient files, cropping sparse, brittle grasses that somehow persist here. Wolves shadow them at a respectful distance, fur heaped like cloaks against the cold. Behind all of it move small clusters of humans wrapped in pelts, breath ghosting in the air, each footfall stitching them closer to lands they've never seen. Everything was connected. As ice advanced, the world dried. So much water imprisoned in glaciers that deserts pushed outward and tropical forests shrank. Where a green carpet once spread, a boundless steppe unfurled. Scientists sometimes call it the Mammoth Steppe, a cross-continental plain stretching from Europe deep into Asia and over to North America, severe but teeming, sustained by endless graze enough to support vast herds and the predators and the strange, clever hunters who followed them. Yet for all its extent, the Ice Age never froze into sameness. Every so often the cold exhaled, the ice withdrew, warmth returned, rivers swelled, forests advanced, and the grasslands retreated. Those interludes did not last. The glaciers always gathered themselves and began again, slow and implacable, until the world stiffened into cold once more. In one such gentler window, people began to flourish shaping stone into razors and barbs, pressing paint onto rock to say, "We were here," and eventually stepping out of the ice-bound world altogether, toward what we now call history. Still, the fingerprints of that frozen age never washed away. We feel them in the land, and we bear them in ourselves, in our migrations and mythologies, perhaps even in our bodies. To understand the present Earth, we must walk back and do the white watch the ice advance, watch the great beasts roam, remember how many versions of this planet existed before it became ours. So let's continue. The wind freshens, the horizon goes white. The story isn't done. The cold has more to show. The chill did not slam the door. It moved across the globe in quiet surges so slow no witness could sense it in a single span of years. But across millennia, the change was inexorable. It began with vanishingly small celestial nudges, subtle shifts in orbit and angle that would seem meaningless to anyone standing on soil. Yet those nudges redistributed sunlight over the north, trimming summer's warmth, and summer by summer the leftover snow lingered. Layer piled on layer, the weight turned snow to fern to ice, and the first glaciers gathered. Once the ice began to flow, nothing on the surface could halt it. No great sheet blinked into existence fully formed. They advanced like armies, meter by meter. At their grandest, they swallowed whole provinces, drowning mountains and valleys. The Laurentide mantle swaddled most of North America, smothering Canada, and pressing deep into the present United States. Across the Atlantic, the Fennoscandian mass blanketed Scandinavia and shoved southward, refashioning the land with weight alone. Far to the south, in high spines of New Zealand and the Andes, bright crowns of ice formed as well. The air changed with the ground. With so much water sequestered in ice, the seas slipped away, revealing shelves of land that had slept beneath waves. Winds scoured new plains and carried pale dust in veils that drifted and settled hundreds of miles away. Loess that even now lies thick in parts of China and the American Midwest. Forests shrank as the world dried. Grasslands marched into their place. Whole ecosystems crept equatorward to keep hold of warmth. But Earth is never driven by a single lever. Climate is a knot of lines all tugging at once. The orbital tune started the song, but others joined the choir. Volcanoes breathing ash and sulfur into the sky to dim the sun. Oceans rearranging the routes of their heat. Currents plunging warmth to the depths. The feedback stacked. More ice meant more sunlight bounced back to space, which meant more cooling, which meant the seas drank down more carbon dioxide, lowering greenhouse gases and inviting the ice to spread again. Reverse the sign and the loop reversed. Deglaciation exposed dark water and land that swallowed light and warmed. Oceans exhaled carbon back to air. The chill loosened its grip. Even within those grand sweeps, the planet twitched. Currents slipped their tracks. Volcanoes coughed and shadowed the sky for years. Ice-dammed lakes swelled to impossible scales and then burst, sluicing floods that tore at continents and perhaps tweaked climate for centuries. To live through any of this was to feel a world leaning slowly out of balance and slowly righting itself. Mammoth herds and bison drifted south when the freeze bit hard, then grazed back north when the ice slackened. Hunters shadowed the migrations, learning to read rivers, coastlines, and the shifting frontiers of cold. The ice wrote all of it down without a pen. Every annual snowfall pressed a new page into the glaciers. Each page captured a breath of the ancient sky. Drill down and you can watch the planet inhale and exhale, sharp plunges and sudden thaws, every lurch and pause of temperature stacked neatly winter atop winter, a library of frozen time. It's one thing to know the rhythm by numbers and charts. It's another to stand in the mind's eye upon a broad, salt-bright plain under a pale sun, wind like a blade, a wall of ice glittering on the horizon where it is inched forward for centuries, imperceptible to any one life. Then, long after anyone's memory, summers lengthen. Meltwater tears channels at the ice's feet. The edge draws back. Raw ground, just freed from its long press, lies open to the light. In time the pendulum swings again. The air cools. The ice rallies. This is the breath of the Ice Age. Not a single frost or thaw, but a patient oscillation strong enough to carve continents. Through those pulses, species adapted, people adjusted, and the Earth arrived at the shape we still recognize, even though so much of that former world has been swallowed by our present warmth. Yet the story isn't only thermometers and lines on a graph. The climate set the theater, yes, but the cast is the living world, odd, immense, and stubborn, giving the age its character. Beneath that endless chill and over those sweeping plains, life didn't wait passively for spring. It invented new ways to endure. Survival demanded more than grit. It demanded change. In the snow-blanketed soils lay a miniature metropolis. Rodents tunneling in lattices of burrow. Small bodies wrapped in earth and frost. Lemmings and voles forming the soft foundation for everything that hunted above. Many remained active, not asleep traveling in the muffled calm beneath the drift where the air was steady and the snow itself served as insulation. Above, the big ones moved with deliberate heft. Woolly mammoths cloaked in long, coarse hair and a dense underwool, able to tolerate cold that would freeze bare skin in minutes. Blood with tweaks that let oxygen be delivered deep into chilled limbs. Musk oxen wearing coats so efficient snow could rest on their backs without melting, proof that almost no heat escaped. Predators tuned themselves to the same hard key. Dire wolves ranged heavier and broader than modern wolves, jaws set to crack bone. Saber-toothed cats waited among scrub to spring upon prey several times their mass. Cave lions, leaner but nearly twice the heft of today's lions, hunted in bands across the open steppe. Plants answered the challenge as well. At first glance, the landscape looks bare, but in the compressed summers and beneath the crust, hardy vegetation flourished. Grasses stitched the mammoth steppe from Europe to North America, nutrient-rich enough to feed the endless jaws of grazers. Low shrubs and creeping willows hugged the ground, safe from wind. They were built to endure long night and to race through short seasons of light, exploding with growth when the sun returned. Even insects found their tricks. Some brewed proteins that worked like antifreeze. Others left eggs to bide the winter and wake at the first slit of warmth. Birds divided their strategies. Many flew toward gentler latitudes, but some remained. Feathers thickened, engines burning hot. The snowy owl patrolled the tundra year-round, riding the lemming tides through the dark. People, comparatively frail, brought another kind of adaptation. Ingenuity. Early foragers stitched fur tight to trap heat, framed shelters from bone and hide mammoth ribs as rafters, skins as weatherproof walls. Fire was more than comfort. It was survival, cooking food for more energy, hardening points, fending back darkness. Every step onto the snow was a calculation. Frostbite and hunger and teeth in the night menaced at the edges, and yet people learned the seasons and the routes, followed migrations, used rivers and coastlines as guides across the endless white. They flaked stone and carved bone into weapons sharp enough to slip through thick hide. Over generations they studied the cold, until they didn't merely endure it, they used its rules. The balance, fragile as it seemed, held. Snow did not smother the world so much as shape it. Under its weight, species bent without breaking. Every adaptation from the vole's hidden tunnels to the mammoth's wool was an answer to an environment that demanded nearly everything and returned almost nothing. And the world didn't only demand, it transformed. As the climate rocked from one state to another, life shifted with it. Some creatures that prospered in the freeze vanished in warmth. Others rose when forests returned. The age of ice wasn't a prison. It was a forge. Its lessons still ring in the living world. Even now, up along the Arctic rim, the old strategies persist. Musk oxen still face the gale in tight ranks. Arctic foxes still change coats with the light, brown to snow white, dissolving into the drifts. These are scraps of an old story still in play, reminders that the Ice Age did not end with a clean edge. It left bright shards embedded across the planet. And as the glaciers inhaled and exhaled, as the cold grew and softened, that hidden web beneath the snow never ceased to shift. What comes next is a world still in motion, a world where ice itself is the sculptor, carving the very bones of the continents. The ice was never still. It crept and shifted, a colossal artisan working in silence. Everywhere it touched, it remade the land, not with chaos, but with slow precision. Beneath the glaciers, mountains bowed under the pressure of frozen rivers thousands of feet thick. Valleys deepened as the ice dragged its rough belly across the stone, grinding it into silt. Where cliffs once stood, smooth U-shaped gorges began to form, their sides polished like mirrors by uncounted centuries of weight. Each movement, invisible to any living creature, left scars that would outlast entire species. In time, when the glaciers melted back, they left behind the architecture of an entirely new world. Chains of lakes filled the hollows where the ice had rested. Rivers found new paths along the scars of the retreat. Enormous ridges of gravel and stone, moraines, marked the edges of the old ice like the outlines of a vanished empire. Every hill, every valley, every smooth basin was the handwriting of the ice. The oceans, too, bore its mark. As the frozen vaults swallowed so much of the planet's water, coastlines retreated, and the exposed seabeds stretched far beyond today's maps. In those new lands, animals and humans wandered freely, unaware that the ground beneath them would someday be lost again to the sea. When the ice finally loosened its grip, meltwater poured back into the oceans, drowning valleys, cutting new fjords, reshaping the face of the continents once more. Even now, the echoes of those floods lie buried in layers of clay and sand at the bottoms of bays and deltas. For early humans, these transformations were both peril and opportunity. The land was raw, unpredictable, but it was also rich. Fresh rivers brought fish and fertile ground. The herds they followed found new grazing routes over the thawing plains. From this ever-changing stage, our ancestors learned a truth older than any tool, that survival was not about mastering nature, but learning to move with it. To them, the ice was not a geological phenomenon. It was a living presence, something vast, unknowable, and alive in its slowness. They gave it respect. They built their shelters in its shadow. And in the quiet between the winds, they listened to it breathe, the groan of shifting ice, the distant thunder of a glacier's heart breaking free. The glaciers did not destroy life. They defined it. They drew the borders of every ecosystem, controlled the rivers, and even shaped the winds. Each advance erased old paths and forced migration. Each retreat created new frontiers. Life adapted, retreated, and returned again. patient, flexible, enduring. And as it did, the planet's pulse continued, slow, rhythmic, unstoppable. The Ice Age was not a single story. It was thousands of overlapping tales written in ice, rock, and bone, of mountains carved and seas born, of forests drowned and plains reborn, of creatures that came, flourished, and vanished without ever knowing how extraordinary their world truly was. And through it all, the Earth kept breathing, in and out, warm and cold, alive and remade. To stand in the heart of that frozen age was to feel small, no matter who or what you were. The world itself seemed magnified, its plains endless, its sky enormous, its silence full of breath. And across those plains, the giants moved. The woolly mammoths came first, vast, slow shadows marching in long, deliberate lines across the white. Their coats swung in heavy curtains of coarse hair, their curved tusks sweeping arcs through the air as they dug for the brittle grass buried beneath the snow. They were not rare, lonely wanderers, but herds, dozens, sometimes hundreds, their tracks pressed deep into the frozen ground, tracing patterns across continents. Beside them trudged the mastodons, smaller, stockier cousins with straight tusks and steady tempers. They kept to the edges of the icy plains, where the last scraps of forest clung to life. They tore bark from trees and shattered branches beneath their weight, turning woodland into open ground wherever they passed. The plains themselves rippled with life. Herds of steppe bison gathered like storm clouds, muscles heavy, shoulders humped, their breath rising in waves of mist. Musk oxen formed tight circles when wolves drew near, their thick coats so dense that the snow lay unmelted upon their backs. And through it all flowed the reindeer, tireless travelers, their migrations painting the land in an endless rhythm of movement and return. Predators haunted the herds like living shadows. Dire wolves, heavier and stronger than the wolves we know today, stalked the edges of the herds, waiting for weakness. Saber-toothed cats, low and silent, crouched in the frostbitten grass, their fangs gleaming like carved ivory in the dim light. And the cave lions, massive and lean, hunted in disciplined silence, their amber eyes fixed on prey far larger than themselves. But even these predators deferred to greater forces. The glaciers loomed above them, titans of another kind, walls of blue-white ice stretching from horizon to horizon, their faces fractured into crevasses so deep they swallowed sound. They moved so slowly that no creature could see their motion, and yet everything on Earth bent to their will. Each crack of shifting ice echoed across valleys for miles, a reminder that the world belonged first and always to the cold. Still, the life that thrived here was not helpless. Every creature was an answer to the ice. Mammoths carried thick layers of fat and wool, blood built to stay warm even in the dead of winter. Reindeer and musk oxen grew coats that trapped air as insulation, turning their bodies into living furnaces. Even the smallest fox had learned to vanish into the white, its fur changing with the seasons, brown in summer, snow pure in winter. And among them, a new kind of survivor walked. Human beings, fragile, barefoot animals by comparison, entered this frozen stage armed not with claws or fangs, but with fire, memory, and will. For them, the mammoth was not only a beast, but a blessing. Its hide became shelter, its bones the frame of homes, its flesh the difference between life and starvation. They carried its image in carvings and painted its shape on cave walls, perhaps out of reverence, perhaps out of fear, or perhaps because it was the largest story they knew. Their world was vast, dangerous, and magnificent. Every breath was earned. Every dawn was survival. To walk across that land was to feel the planet itself. The sting of air sharp enough to cut. The slow grind of distant glaciers. The trembling earth beneath herds that blotted the horizon. It was a world sculpted by forces too large for understanding, and yet, in its frozen heart, perfectly balanced. The glaciers advanced and retreated. The beasts thrived and perished. Life endured and adapted. And through the great pendulum of cold and warmth, humans kept learning, watching the patterns of the ice and the sun, following the long, slow dance of survival. Even at the height of the cold, the earth was never still. It breathed, slow, vast, deliberate. Over tens of thousands of years, its temperature rose and fell like a sleeping giant's chest. Each breath reshaped the land, drawing the glaciers forward, then letting them go. And within that endless motion lay a rhythm, subtle, mathematical, and ancient beyond comprehension. The first to trace that rhythm were the scientists who studied the planet's orbit, the long dance between Earth and Sun. They discovered that our world does not circle its star in perfect simplicity. It sways and tilts, stretches and relaxes, like a pendulum governed by gravity and time. These slow oscillations, eccentricity, tilt, and wobble, became known as the Milankovitch cycles, named for the mathematician who first measured the pattern written in the heavens. Over spans of tens of millennia, the Earth's orbit elongates, its axis leans a little more or a little less, and the planet's subtle wobble shifts the sunlight across its surface. Each motion is almost imperceptible, but together they decide how much warmth reaches the northern lands, the cradle of glaciers. When the tilt is shallower, summers in the north grow weaker. Snow lingers. Ice thickens. The white expands. When the tilt steepens, the summers sharpen too, melting more snow, pulling the glaciers back toward the poles. A quiet equilibrium emerges, a cosmic seesaw where sunlight and shadow trade dominion across millennia. Yet these slow orbital shifts alone could not account for the power of the Ice Age. They only whispered the first note of a symphony that the Earth itself amplified. Because the planet is not passive. It answers every nudge with a chain of reactions, each echoing, amplifying, cascading. As ice spreads, it mirrors the sun, reflecting more light back into space and deepening the chill. The colder the world grows, the more carbon dioxide the oceans swallow, pulling greenhouse gases from the air and locking them beneath the waves. That, in turn, cools the atmosphere even more, and the white tide of the glaciers flows farther outward. Each feedback loop tightens the spiral, a slow, irresistible descent into cold. But the balance works both ways. When warmth begins to return, the glaciers shrink, exposing dark land and open sea that drink in sunlight. The oceans breathe out their stored carbon, feeding the warmth, and the planet exhales. The pendulum swings back toward light. The Ice Age was not a single winter. It was a planetary heartbeat. The glaciers advanced and retreated like tides on a scale beyond human measure, each cycle carving and erasing the map of the world. To live in that age was to exist upon the moving skin of a breathing planet, to feel the slow rhythm of time written not in years, but in ages. Yet even within these grand pulses, the Earth was capable of sudden, breathtaking change. A shift in ocean currents could warm or freeze a hemisphere. A veil of volcanic ash could dim the sun for a decade. And sometimes, a single rupture in an ice wall, a flood released from a trapped ancient lake, could redraw the face of a continent overnight. These shocks echoed through the food chains, testing every creature's will to adapt. And still, life endured. Mammoths migrated, forests advanced and retreated like armies. People followed the rivers and the herds, learning the tempo of the planet as though it were music. Deep beneath the glaciers, that music is still preserved. Each year's snowfall pressed into the next, thin layers of time, each holding the memory of an ancient sky. In those frozen archives, we can read the Earth's breathing, its exhalations of warmth, its long silences of cold, its pauses and recoveries. A library of deep time, still whispering the rhythm of the Ice Age. Beneath the endless cold, life endured. It didn't wait for warmth. It adapted to the cold's demand. Even under the pale sun and the cutting wind, the earth was alive. It whispered in the burrows beneath the snow, in the slow migrations of herds, in the quiet persistence of plants that clung to light like memory. To live in the Ice Age was not a matter of strength. It was a matter of change. Every living thing, from the smallest vole to the towering mammoth, carried the blueprint of resilience written in its bones. Beneath the snow lay another world, unseen, but vital. Tiny rodents tunneled through the frozen soil, their lives a secret labyrinth. Lemmings, voles, and stoats scurried through narrow corridors carved in the frost, their breath warming little pockets of air beneath the ice. The snow above insulated them, muting the storms. They were the pulse of the tundra, small hearts beating against an endless winter. Above them roamed the giants, mammoths wrapped in shaggy coats of hair and dense underwool, weathered temperatures that would freeze bare skin in minutes. Their blood carried a secret, a molecular trick that let them release oxygen even in the chill of their extremities, keeping limbs warm and muscles strong, while frost ruled the plains. Beside them, musk oxen stood like living fortresses, their fur so thick that snow settled on their backs without melting. Predators thrived too. Dire wolves, built for endurance, patrolled the edges of the herds. Saber-toothed cats waited in the shadows, their fangs glinting like knives forged from ice. And cave lions, sleek, silent, and twice the size of those we know today, stalked across the open ground with terrifying grace. They hunted not just with strength, but with patience, as if they understood that in the cold, energy was sacred. Even the plants of this frozen world were miracles of endurance. The tundra was not barren. It was hidden. Grasses spread their roots wide beneath the permafrost, hoarding what little warmth the sun gave. Shrubs bent low to the ground, their branches hugging the earth to escape the wind. When summer came, brief, dazzling, and wild, they burst into frantic life, racing the clock of warmth before the frost returned. Some insects produced their own antifreeze, proteins that kept their blood from turning solid in the deep freeze. Others slept through the worst months, their eggs waiting for the faint touch of sun to awaken them. And birds, fragile, weightless creatures, found their own way to defy the cold. Some flew south each year, while others stayed, their feathers thick and their eyes bright with endurance. The snowy owl, pale and proud, ruled the tundra skies year-round, a ghost of the ice itself. And then there were humans. Soft-skinned, small, and fragile. By every natural rule, they should not have survived. But they did, because they were the only ones who could imagine warmth. Fire became their heartbeat. They wore the hides of beasts they'd hunted, stitched with sinew and bone needles into second skins. They built shelters from mammoth bones, arched into frames and covered in thick layers of hide. Inside, the air was warm, the light golden, the world outside held at bay by flame and will. Their tools grew sharper, their spears tipped with carved stone and bone, gave them reach against the giants they pursued. They painted the walls of their caves, not out of vanity, but out of something older, deeper. Perhaps to remember, perhaps to honor, or perhaps to make sense of the frozen vastness that surrounded them. To them, the ice was not only an enemy, it was the landscape of meaning. It taught them patience. It taught them fear. It taught them that even in a world ruled by cold, warmth could be made, if you knew where to find it. And so, life continued, fragile yet unbroken. The snow did not bury the world. It shaped it. Each adaptation, each clever trick of survival, was a conversation with the cold, a truce between life and the frost. The Ice Age was no frozen prison. It was a forge, and out of that forge came creatures, instincts, and ideas that would echo through all the ages to come. Even now, in the Arctic's white silence, you can still hear it, the faint whisper of that ancient agreement. Life promising the earth it will endure, no matter how long the winter lasts. The cold did not last forever. it never does. Even the deepest winter eventually exhales, and the earth, faithful to its rhythm, began to warm again. At first it was subtle, a few longer summers, a gentler wind. Snow melted a little earlier each year, and the ice at the edge of the glaciers softened to a dull, dripping shine. No one alive could have sensed the scale of it, but the planet was shifting, inch by inch, toward a world reborn. The glaciers began to retreat. Slowly, almost reluctantly, they pulled back across the land. Their massive weight, pressing down for millennia, lifted at last. The earth groaned and cracked as it breathed out. Rivers burst from beneath the ice, roaring into valleys that had slept under frost for ages. The water was thick with silt and stone, and as it surged toward the sea, it redrew the shape of continents. Great floods followed. Walls of meltwater released when glaciers fractured or ice dams failed. In hours, entire landscapes vanished. Valleys became lakes. Forests drowned. Ancient plains were carved into channels so deep that rivers still follow their paths today. Some scientists believe the sound of these floods, the thunder of worlds collapsing, must have echoed across entire hemispheres. As the earth warmed, the oceans rose. The land bridges that had once connected continents, Beringia between Asia and America, Doggerland between Britain and Europe, slipped quietly beneath the waves. The people who had walked across them found their paths gone, the sea reclaiming its dominion. Coastlines crept inland, and new islands emerged from the thaw. The planet, always alive, was reshaping itself once more. But with the warmth came loss. The giants of the Ice Age, those magnificent beasts of fur and bone, began to vanish. The great herds of mammoths dwindled, their feeding grounds turning from grassland to forest. Mastodons disappeared from the plains they had ruled. The saber-toothed cats went silent, their long fangs gleaming useless in the sunlit thaw. The cave lions, the giant sloths, the dire wolves. One by one, they passed into the long sleep of extinction. Why they vanished remains a question whispered through time. Some say it was the changing climate, the warmth robbing them of the cold they needed. Others believe it was us, the hunters, the clever, relentless bipeds who followed their trails with fire and spear. Perhaps it was both. The line between nature's rhythm and human ambition has always been thin. Those who survived, the foxes, the bison, the reindeer, adapted again. They grew smaller, faster, more cunning. The world they inherited was softer, greener, but also more fragile. Forests spread northward, rivers ran freer, and grasslands became meadows filled with color and life. The Ice Age had ended, but its memory remained etched into the bones of everything it had touched. For humans, this new age was opportunity. With the thaw came abundance. Fish in the rivers, fruit in the forests, animals that could be tamed, plants that could be sown. They no longer needed to wander endlessly across the tundra. They settled, built villages, watched the stars, and began the long experiment that would become civilization. Yet even as they tilled the soil and shaped the world to their will, they carried the Ice Age within them, its lessons, its patience, its hunger. The fire that had once kept them alive in caves became the light of hearths, temples, and cities. The same ingenuity that shaped spears now shaped stones, walls, and monuments. The cold had not defeated them. It had defined them. And beneath their feet, the earth still bore the scars of its long frozen sleep. The lakes, carved by glaciers, glittered in the sun. The ridges of old moraines marked the edge of forgotten ice. Even now, the continents carry those fingerprints, frozen in time, quiet reminders of an age when the world was young and survival was an art written in frost. The Ice Age ended not with a roar, but with a sigh, a slow, thawing exhale that remade everything. And from that breath, from the melt of ancient glaciers and the silence of vanishing giants, a new story began. The story of us, the children of the cold, born from the endurance of a planet that remembers. Though the ice retreated, it never truly left. Its fingerprints remain everywhere, etched into mountains, buried beneath forests, hidden deep in the soil beneath our cities. We live surrounded by its ghosts. Every valley that cradles a river, every lake that mirrors the sky, every smooth, rounded hill that breaks the horizon, all of them are relics of that long, frozen rain. The glaciers were the Earth's sculptors, and we are the inheritors of their work. If you've ever walked across a meadow scattered with boulders that seem out of place, you've walked across the path of a glacier, those stones carried for hundreds of miles in the slow hands of ice. If you've stood on a cliff beside a northern fjord, its waters stretching into the distance like a mirror of the sky. You've looked into a wound carved by frozen rivers a mile thick. And if you've ever stood at the edge of the sea, watching the tide roll in, you've stood where the ice once ended, where the world stopped freezing and began again. The shape of continents, the courses of rivers, the boundaries of forests, all were redrawn by that age. Even our climate still carries its rhythm. The winds that circle the poles, the deep currents that flow through the oceans, they were born from the cold and still remember its cadence. The glaciers are gone, but their breath lingers in the patterns of the planet. And their story, too, remains inside us. Every human being alive today is descended from survivors of that age. The instincts that guided our ancestors, the drive to seek warmth, the fear of hunger, the urge to gather together around light, still live within our minds. The Ice Age didn't just shape the Earth, it sculpted humanity. It taught us how to imagine. It forced us to dream of fire before we could make it, to picture shelter before we could build it. In every tool, every story, every spark of creativity, there is a trace of that ancient cold. Even our myths remember. Across cultures, echoes of the Ice Age survive, stories of endless winters, floods, and rebirth. The Norse spoke of Fimbulwinter, a season so long and brutal it would end the world. The Greeks told of an age when frost conquered the land, and only divine fire could save mankind. Even the tale of a paradise lost, of warmth turned to exile, may have roots in the first moment our ancestors felt the cold close in and realized the world could change. And still, the earth changes. The ice returns in whispers, in the mountains, in the poles, in the slow melt of glaciers that once seemed eternal. We live between two extremes, the memory of cold and the fear of warmth. We measure the past in ice cores and the future in degrees. The same planet that once froze now warms, and we find ourselves again facing the power of climate, not as myth, but as consequence. Yet, even in this, the lesson of the Ice Age endures. Nothing on Earth is permanent, and nothing truly ends. The ice came and went. The giants rose and fell, and the world remade itself again and again. Perhaps the truest legacy of the Ice Age is perspective. To look at the scars of the land and realize they are beautiful. To know that even the fiercest forces of nature can give way to renewal. And to understand that life, fragile, stubborn, miraculous, will always find a way to adapt. We are, after all, the children of that cold. Our world, our species, our very breath, all born from the patience of ice and the warmth that followed. The glaciers melted, but their story remains, written in stone, whispered by the wind, and kept alive in every river that still flows from their ancient touch. The Ice Age is over, but its echo lives on, in the shape of our continents, in the stories we tell, and in the quiet truth that even the coldest winter carries within it the promise of spring. Listen closely. If you stand very still, on a mountain ridge beside a northern lake, or in the silence of winter, you can still hear it. A low hum beneath the wind, the slow breathing of a planet that remembers. The Ice Age is gone, yet its presence lingers like a heartbeat in the earth itself. It echoes through the ground you walk on, in the cool breath of the morning, in the rhythm of the seasons that return without fail. Even now, the world still turns to the old tempo, the quiet pulse of deep time. The ice once ruled everything. It shaped mountains into cathedrals and carved valleys into rivers. It forged life out of endurance and taught every living thing that strength is not defiance. It is adaptation. And when the ice withdrew, it left behind more than scars. It left wisdom, that everything changes, that no empire, not of stone nor fur nor flesh, lasts forever. That survival is not about conquest, but balance. We too are part of that memory. Our blood carries the chemistry of those who learn to live beside the cold. Our imagination, the fire that separates us from the beasts, was born in that long night when our ancestors stared into the dark and dreamed of warmth. The Ice Age ended, but the longing it taught us for safety, for beauty, for connection, never did. When we build, we shape. When we destroy, we renew. Every act of creation is a thaw, and every silence a return to frost. We live suspended between the memory of ice and the promise of fire. That is the rhythm of the earth, to freeze, to melt, to begin again. So tonight, as the world outside grows quiet, remember that the ground beneath you once slept under glaciers, that mountains were once waves of frozen time, that everything you see was once buried and then reborn. Close your eyes. Listen to the slow turning of the planet, the whisper of snow that fell 10,000 years ago. It's still there, in the air you breathe, in the pulse of the oceans, in the gentle hush that comes before dawn. The story of the Ice Age is not one of death, but of transformation. And maybe that's the truest story of all, that nothing is ever really gone, only changed, waiting beneath the surface, ready to rise again when the world remembers how to breathe. The cold sleeps. The earth turns. And somewhere deep below, the memory of ice still dreams. The glaciers were not quiet. They were not the motionless walls of white we sometimes imagine, but living machines, forces so immense and deliberate that they remade continents grain by grain. They pressed down upon the planet with the patience of eternity, sculpting valleys, tearing away forests, and crushing mountains into dust. When we picture the Ice Age, it's easy to think of stillness, but these vast ice sheets were in constant motion, slow and unstoppable, a rhythm of creation and destruction unfolding over thousands of years. In the north, the greatest of them, the Laurentide ice sheet, stretched across what is now Canada and the northern United States, a slab of frozen mass rising higher than mountain peaks. Across the Atlantic, the Fennoscandian ice sheet crept over Scandinavia and deep into Europe, its frozen front inching forward like a tide made of stone. And far to the south, smaller sheets crowned the highlands of South America, the mountains of New Zealand, and the farther reaches of Antarctica, where ice spread beyond its modern bounds. None of these glaciers were gentle. They did not flow like water, they consumed. As they advanced, their weight scraped away everything in their path. Forests splintered, hills were flattened, and the very crust of the earth bent beneath their pressure, sinking under the burden of miles thick ice. When the climate shifted and the glaciers melted back, that same land slowly rose again, a rebound so gradual that even now, thousands of years later, the ground beneath Canada and Scandinavia still lifts itself skyward, remembering the weight that once crushed it. The scars they left behind are everywhere. You can trace their passage in the deep, U-shaped valleys that mark the northern world, the smooth floors and steep cliffs carved by centuries of glacial grinding. You can see it in the lonely boulders scattered across open fields, giant stones carried for hundreds of miles and dropped where the ice finally released its grip. And you can see it in the lakes, thousands of them, filling the hollows gouged out by glaciers as they retreated. The Great Lakes of North America are the most famous, their waters resting in the scars of the vanished Laurentide. But glaciers did more than sculpt land. They redrew the map of the seas. When their frozen mass grew, they trapped the planet's water, pulling it from the oceans and lowering sea levels across the world. Coastlines stretched outward, continents grew, and when the ice finally melted, the seas surged back, swallowing everything they had once abandoned. The land bridges that once linked Asia to North America or Europe to Britain existed only because so much water was locked away in ice. Each pulse of glacial growth and retreat rewrote the shape of the Earth. And yet, for all their unimaginable power, the glaciers themselves moved at a pace so slow that a single human life would not have noticed their advance. A few feet per day, that was enough to shift continents. To stand before one was to face a moving eternity, a shining wall of frozen pressure, alive with motion too slow to see. Sometimes if you stood close enough, you could hear it, the echo of creation itself, the groan of compacting ice, the thunder of fractures running deep within the glacier's heart. And when the meltwater beneath the surface finally broke free, it exploded across the land. Torrents of ancient water unleashed in floods that carved new rivers in a matter of days. These were not streams, they were cataclysms. They ripped through rock and valley, reshaping the world with a violence that no storm or earthquake could match. Yet from this destruction came renewal. Where glaciers withdrew, they left behind clean, raw ground, rock and mineral dust rich with promise. And life, ever watchful, was quick to seize the opportunity. Seeds took root in the fresh soil, and green returned to the land the ice had erased. In time, animals followed, and behind them came the first human hunters, tracking the herds across landscapes newly born. The glaciers did not only sculpt the earth, they kept its memories. Within their frozen depths, the planet's past was sealed away, layer by layer, in bands of ice that preserved air, ash, and dust from ages long gone. If you were to slice deep into that frozen archive, you'd find ancient whispers, bubbles of air from prehistoric skies, traces of volcanic eruptions that once dimmed the sun, and grains of pollen from forgotten forests. Each layer is a heartbeat of time, a frozen page in the story of a planet learning to breathe. Through them, scientists can still read the rhythm of Earth's pulse, its slow inhalations of warmth, its long exhalations of cold. But for the creatures who lived in that era, the glaciers were not archives. They were walls, vast, impenetrable, and alive. To a mammoth or a bison, the edge of a glacier was the end of the world. To early humans, it was both boundary and guide. They followed its meltwater rivers, its valleys where the ice had not yet conquered the land, moving cautiously along the edges of an empire made of frozen stone. The ice sheets grew and shrank with the planet's quiet pulse. Each advance carved a little deeper. Each retreat revealed new land, raw and trembling in the cold sunlight. When you look at a map today, the hills of northern Europe, the scattered lakes of Canada, the fertile plains of the American Midwest, you are looking at the handwriting of glaciers. Every ridge, every valley, every rolling horizon was shaped by their patient and merciless hands. These were not merely frozen masses of water. They were chisels that carved the continents, architects of the modern world. And while they sculpted the land, they were also rewriting the oceans. When the glaciers grew, they swallowed the seas. So much of the planet's water was locked in their frozen weight that the oceans themselves fell, hundreds of feet lower than they are today. The coastline stretched outward, revealing lands that had slept for ages beneath the waves. As the waters withdrew, rivers carved new channels through the exposed seabeds, and entire continents gained new edges. It was as though the earth had taken a long, slow breath in, and the seas had followed. At the height of the Ice Age, the sea level dropped by more than 100 meters. It didn't happen overnight. It was a steady retreat, a tide that withdrew over millennia, paced by the silent growth of the ice sheets. What had once been shallow coastal waters became open plains. Bays turned into valleys, islands merged with the mainland, and vast bridges of land rose between continents now divided by sea. The most famous of these was Beringia, the bridge that once connected Asia and North America. But bridge is too small a word. It was an entire country of its own, hundreds of miles wide, a frozen grassland threaded with rivers and dotted with life. Mammoths and bison roamed there, and the first humans walked beside them, following herds into lands no one had ever seen. To them, it was not a crossing. It was home, a boundless plain that stretched beneath a pale sky, a world between worlds. Farther south, the Sunda Shelf connected the islands of Southeast Asia to the mainland, forming a single immense landmass. Australia, New Guinea, and Tasmania merged into one. In Europe, the North Sea's floor lay dry and open, a vast region now called Doggerland, where rivers meandered through fields of grass, and hunters followed red deer across gentle hills. These new lands did more than reshape geography. They rewrote destiny. Animals migrated into new territories, humans followed step by step, across a world expanding beneath their feet. Every shift of the glaciers, every drop of the sea opened a new path, a new beginning, and changed the future of life forever. The Ice Age was not silent. Even in stillness the world breathed, through wind, dust, and endless motion. The cold alone did not define it. Above the ice, the sky itself became an active force, sculpting the land as surely as the glaciers did below. When the seas retreated and the glaciers advanced, they left behind vast stretches of naked earth, barren plains stripped of soil and stone. The wind found its freedom there. It swept across these empty expanses, lifting the finest grains of glacial dust and sending them spiraling into the sky. Storm after storm carried that powder across continents, turning sunsets pale and the horizon hazy. This dust was the memory of mountains, ground to powder beneath the glacier's weight, then carried across the world to settle in soft, unseen layers. In time, those deposits grew thick, hundreds of feet deep in places across China, Europe, and North America. Long after the glaciers vanished, that same dust would become the rich, fertile soil of the farmlands that feed the world today. But in its own time, during the Age of Ice, it created a landscape of constant motion. The air shimmered with fine grains and the wind never rested. The Ice Age atmosphere was not the crisp, blue vault we imagine, but a veil of particles that softened the sun, painting it in muted golds and silvers. The weather itself was an engine of extremes. The frozen north and the slightly warmer south clashed, creating violent pressure differences that drove unending gales. These winds scoured the plains, flattening snow into hard, glassy sheets, and carried away what little warmth the earth could muster. They hurled snow into high drifts that buried valleys and stripped exposed hills to their bones. Even the sky was restless, always shifting, always filled with motion. Yet beneath this chaos, there was order. The dust storms that dulled the light also fed the land. As those particles settled, they carried with them nutrients, minerals ground from ancient rock, scattered like seeds across the frozen steppe. In that strange balance of hardship and abundance, grasslands flourished where none should have survived, and where grass grew, life followed. Herds of mammoth and bison moved with the winds, seeking places where snow had been swept thin, where the ground was bare enough to graze. Predators trailed them, their fates tied to the same invisible currents that shaped the world. Even the first humans learned to read the sky, to sense the coming of storms, to follow the direction of the wind, to find shelter when the horizon blurred into white. The air itself was different then. The levels of carbon dioxide were far lower than in our age, thinning the planet's greenhouse blanket and deepening the cold. Moisture was scarce. Snow fell rarely near the vast glaciers, not because the cold forbade it, but because the air held so little water to give. In the heart of the icebound world, there were deserts made not of sand, but of snow and silence. Lands so dry and hard that even the frost could not cling to them. Sometimes, volcanoes broke that silence. Great eruptions spewed ash into the sky, casting shadows that dimmed the sun for years. In the layers of ice that remain today, scientists can still find those black traces, moments when the world held its breath, and the glaciers seized the chance to grow even farther. To live beneath that sky was to exist between extremes, the fierce winds and the heavy stillness, the blinding white of snow and the dim gold of sun through dust. It was an atmosphere both hostile and alive, a moving balance between chaos and creation. If you stood there, on one of those wide, pale plains, you would feel it in your lungs. The cold would burn sharp and clean. The horizon would blur into the gray of drifting powder. The sun, weak but steady, would glow above you like an ember refusing to die. And in that moment, you'd understand that the sky, like the ice and the sea, was part of the same vast machinery of change, a living force shaping the planet's every breath. Beneath that restless sky, the earth opened into an endless expanse, a boundless frozen sea of grass and silence known today as the Mammoth Steppe. It stretched from France to Siberia, from Alaska to the Yukon, a single, unbroken world of wind and frost, where the sun rolled low across the horizon and the seasons spoke in extremes. This was the heart of the Ice Age, a land that should not have lived, and yet pulsed with more life than almost any place on Earth. Here, in the shadow of the glaciers, the world became a paradox. Cold, yet fertile. Barren, yet abundant. The dust that drifted across the sky carried the minerals of mountains. Each grain that fell returned richness to the soil, and out of that hardship grew a kingdom of grass. The grass was not ordinary. It was strong, resilient, packed with nutrients, designed for survival in brief summers and endless winters. For months it slept beneath snow and ice, then burst into furious growth at the first touch of light. Those few weeks of warmth fed the giants, and the giants came. Across that frozen ocean of steppe moved the great herds, woolly mammoths with curved tusks like crescents of ivory, mastodons that lumbered through patchy forests, bison in uncountable numbers, musk oxen huddling tight against the wind, and reindeer that migrated endlessly across the frozen plains. Each step of their hooves left marks in the permafrost, each breath a plume of steam in the pale light. Behind them came the predators. Dire wolves, massive and relentless, hunted in coordinated packs, their howls rolling through the cold like thunder. Saber-toothed cats lay in wait among frost-bent shrubs, their fangs glinting like daggers in the sun. And on the far edges of the plains, lean, golden cave lions stalked in shadows, their eyes fixed on the moving herds. The air was full of sound, not noise, but rhythm. The crunch of frozen grass beneath countless feet, the distant call of birds migrating south, the deep rumble of ice shifting in the north. It was the heartbeat of the Pleistocene, slow, powerful, and constant. In this world, survival meant movement. The herds never stopped. They followed the grass as it grew and faded, chasing the thin lines of warmth that wandered between ice and tundra. When the glaciers advanced, they moved south. When the world thawed, they returned. And always, the hunters followed. Wolves, lions, and eventually, humans. For early humans, this was both a world of terror and abundance. They watched the great beasts from a distance, learning their movements, their habits, their weaknesses. A single mammoth meant food, shelter, and survival for an entire clan. Its bones became frames for shelters. Its hide became warmth against the killing wind. Its fat became fire and light. But it was never easy. Each hunt was a test of patience and courage, a contest between fragile humans and creatures built for an age of endurance. To kill one was to challenge the ice itself. Yet slowly, generation by generation, humans learned. They crafted tools sharper than bone, honed from flint and obsidian. They built fires that burned against the darkness. They painted what they saw on the walls of caves deep beneath the earth, where flickering light turned the past into living motion. Mammoths, bison, and lions still walk those walls today, etched in ochre and charcoal, testament to a time when the line between survival and extinction was drawn in the color of firelight. Every creature, every blade of grass, every gust of wind was part of the same fragile web, a balance built on scarcity and endurance. Here, in this frozen wilderness, life did not fight against the cold. It became one with it. The mammoth steppe was more than an ecosystem. It was the Earth's great experiment, a living bridge between warmth and ice, a place where adaptation was law and failure meant forgetting. And though that steppe has long since vanished beneath forests and seas, its legacy endures, in bones beneath the tundra, in the DNA of modern animals, and in the imagination of those who still listen to the wind and hear, faintly, the thunder of hooves across a world of snow and silence. For thousands of years, the planet held its breath. Ice ruled the north and south, locking oceans, lands, and winds in a fragile balance. But the balance could not last forever. The same slow rhythms that had brought the cold would, in time, begin to reverse. And so began the Great Thaw. Not a season, not a storm, but a transformation that would change the face of the earth forever. It started quietly. Summers grew longer, winters shorter. Snow that once lingered into spring began to melt, and the edge of the glaciers turned slick with water. Each droplet that trickled down their frozen faces was the beginning of something unstoppable. The melt gathered strength. Rivers swelled and split, carving through the land the ice had left behind. Lakes formed where the glacier's weight had pressed the earth down, and from beneath the ice came floods beyond imagination. Walls of water roaring across continents, carrying boulders like pebbles and cutting valleys wide enough to be seen from the sky. It was chaos and rebirth in equal measure. The world was waking. As the ice retreated, green returned. Grasses crept northward, forests followed, and animals that had once huddled in the shadow of glaciers spread into lands they had never known. The mammoths, mastodons, and giant ground sloths followed the warmth, but the world they had been made for was fading beneath their feet. The vast steppe began to shrink. Where there had been endless plains, trees now rose, their roots splitting the frozen ground. The herds that once stretched from horizon to horizon found themselves hemmed in by forests and marshes. For the giants of the Ice Age, this was the beginning of the end. The change was not cruel, only indifferent. The same climate that had created them now erased the stage on which they had thrived. Their thick coats became burdens. Their grazing grounds turned to mud and forest floor. And as the world warmed, another kind of hunter grew more bold. Humans, once scattered bands of survivors on the edge of the cold, began to multiply. They followed the rivers that flowed from melting glaciers, settling the fertile valleys and coasts revealed by the rising seas. They learned to plant and to herd, to build villages where mammoths once roamed. The old world of ice and endurance gave way to one of soil and settlement. But even as the ice receded, it refused to vanish entirely. It left reminders, scars, and echoes. The deep lakes of Canada and Scandinavia, the smooth hills of northern Europe, the glacial boulders scattered like forgotten monuments across fields, All were gifts of the ice. The land itself had been remade, and everything that would come after, cities, farms, nations, would rise on the bones of that frozen past. And though the last great glaciers melted 12,000 years ago, the world still carries their memory. You can see it in the curve of the valleys, in the soil beneath your feet, in the cool depths of the northern lakes. Even now, the earth breathes in the rhythm the ice taught it. Slow, patient, unending. Even now, long after the last glacier drew its final breath, the earth still hums with the memory of cold. Every river that winds through a valley, every pebble smoothed by time, is part of that echo, a whisper left by the age of ice. The great herds are gone, their bones buried in the permafrost, their stories preserved in the dark silence beneath our feet. But the world they shaped has never truly disappeared. It lives in the air, the soil, the rhythm of the seasons. Each winter that sweeps across the northern sky is a soft reminder, a shadow of the ancient breath that once covered continents. We still walk the land the glaciers carved. Cities rise where the ice once stood. Roads follow the same valleys that meltwater once carved in frenzy. And beneath those quiet surfaces, the planet still shifts, still breathes, still carries the slow pulse of its frozen heart. If you stand on a northern plain at dawn, when the mist drifts low and the wind smells faintly of frost, you can feel it. That strange, distant stillness, as though the world is remembering something vast and old. It is the same silence that wrapped the mammoth steppe, the same hush that settled over sleeping forests as glaciers crept nearby. We are creatures of warmth, but we are made from ice. Our landscapes, our histories, our very migrations were born from the thaw. Without the Ice Age, there would be no rivers to cradle our cities, no fertile plains to feed our children, no gentle cycle of winter and spring to remind us that every ending carries renewal. The ice was both sculptor and teacher. It taught the planet patience. It taught life how to bend and not break. And it taught us, fragile, curious, wandering humans, that survival is a kind of art. So when the air turns cold and you see your breath drift into the night, remember that it's the same air that once froze against a glacier's face, the same world, the same breath, still turning, still alive. Close your eyes. Imagine the sound of the ancient wind rushing over a plain of snow that no longer exists. Imagine the stars reflecting on a sea of ice that stretched for 1,000 miles, and then imagine the warmth returning, soft, steady, unstoppable. Because that is what the earth does. It changes, it remembers, it endures. And somewhere deep beneath your heartbeat, the echo of the ice is still there. Quiet, steady, eternal. Sleep now, traveler of time. The frost has melted, but the story remains. The world turns gently, and beneath it all, the memory of the cold hums on, soft as breath, old as stone, and endless as the sky. Stretching from the western edges of Europe to the frozen heart of Siberia, and across the bridge of ice toward North America, there once existed a realm unlike any seen today. It was neither tundra nor forest, neither barren nor lush, but something between, a boundless plain of wind and grass that supported one of the greatest concentrations of life in Earth's history. Scientists call it the Mammoth Steppe, the living pulse of the Ice Age world. This vast domain was immense, larger than any single ecosystem that survives now. Its air was dry and sharp, its summers fleeting, its winters merciless. And yet, despite the cold, it was astonishingly alive. The ground was blanketed in dense, wiry grasses and hardy herbs. Plants evolved to thrive during the brief season of warmth. They didn't grow tall or waste energy reaching for the light. Instead, They clung close to the soil, storing strength beneath the wind's reach, surviving where only the toughest could endure. From this ocean of grass rose the food web that sustained an entire world of titans. Herds of woolly mammoths roamed in their thousands, sweeping the snow aside with their long curved tusks to uncover the green life below. Steppe bison, their heavy coats rippling in the wind, grazed in steady lines across the horizon. Small, muscular wild horses, the ancestors of those we know today, thundered across the plains in tightly bound herds, their breath clouds rising like mist. Among them wandered the mighty woolly rhinoceroses, broad-shouldered, shaggy, and armed with horns that could slice through drifts of snow or fend off anything bold enough to challenge them. But the mammoth steppe was not ruled by herbivores alone. It was also a kingdom of predators, powerful, cunning, and relentless. Dire wolves, larger and stronger than any wolf alive today, followed the herds, their jaws built to crush bone. Cave lions, nearly twice the size of modern lions, hunted in teams across the edges of the plains. And then there were the saber-toothed cats, creatures of muscle and precision, lying in wait for the moment to strike, their curved fangs flashing like ivory scythes in the pale light. Still, the great beasts were only part of the story. Every inch of the land was alive with movement. Beneath the frozen soil, lemmings and ground squirrels dug vast webs of tunnels, hidden highways beneath the steppe. Arctic foxes darted between snowdrifts, scavenging the remains of hunts or stalking the tiny lives below. Above, ravens wheeled and vultures circled, black shapes drifting against the gray-white sky, waiting for the first sign of blood on snow. And then, there were the newcomers, humans. They came later than the beasts, but they quickly learned the rhythm of the land. They followed the herds, reading tracks in the frost, testing their strength against the giants of the Ice Age. Their shelters were framed with mammoth bones, covered in hides to block the cutting wind. In the flickering light of their fires, they painted the animals they depended on. Mammoths, horses, and bison, across the walls of caves. Their art was both worship and survival, an attempt to understand, to remember, and perhaps to endure. What made the mammoth steppe extraordinary was not only its size, but its endurance. For thousands upon thousands of years, it remained a world apart, shaped by cold, yet shielded from its full cruelty. This frozen grassland was a paradox, both harsh and generous, barren and abundant. Its strength came from balance. The grasses that ruled it were built for survival. They endured the long winters in silence, sleeping beneath the snow, then erupted with furious energy when the brief sun of summer returned. They needed no forests or deep soil. They drew their power from dust, from the fine glacial silt left behind by the retreating ice. Their roots anchored the land, held the water, and fed a food chain that spanned from the smallest burrowing rodent to the largest creature that ever walked the plains. Even as glaciers advanced and withdrew, the steppe endured, always rebuilding, always returning, always alive. When the cold deepened, the grass bent and waited. When the warmth returned, it sprang up again, filling the horizon with movement and color. It was a rhythm older than civilization, older even than humankind itself. The cycle of freezing and rebirth made the mammoth steppe a world of endless resilience. While the edges of continents cracked beneath the weight of ice, this inland realm remained a sanctuary for life. It wasn't the warmth that sustained it. It was the cold itself. The frost preserved, the winds renewed, and the dust carried nutrients across the vast plains, spreading fertility where there should have been none. We still see traces of that world today. In the frozen depths of Siberia, mammoths rest where they fell, entombed in permafrost, so perfect that their fur still clings to their hides, their stomachs filled with the grass they ate the day they died. Through them, we can still glimpse that ancient land, a place of life thriving at the edge of extinction, where the air was thin and the ground was hard, but the pulse of the earth beat strong beneath the snow. Standing there, at the center of it all, would have have been overwhelming. The horizon stretched unbroken in every direction. No forests, no mountains, only wind and motion. The air trembled with the distant rumble of hooves, the calls of predators echoing through the open expanse, and the endless sigh of the wind carrying the sound of life across an ocean of frost. Every creature, from the smallest vole to the tallest mammoth, played a role in that vast, interwoven system. Grass became flesh, breath became dust, and dust became grass again. It was a perfect, fragile cycle, a self-sustaining miracle sculpted by cold and time. But even miracles have their limits. The mammoth step, for all its power and endurance, depended on one thing above all: the cold. When the world began to warm, when the glaciers faltered and forests crept northward, the steppe began to shrink. The grass gave way to trees, the herds grew smaller, and the great plain of giants, the cradle of Ice Age life, began to fade into memory. Before that final thaw, though, this frozen kingdom stood as one of Earth's greatest stages. Here, humans learned to survive against the impossible. Here, the last titans of the Pleistocene ruled the land. And here, in this cold and dusty expanse, life proved once again that even in the harshest places, the world never truly stops breathing. Across the endless plains of the mammoth steppe, where the wind carved its signature into the snow, small bands of humans moved with the rhythm of the seasons. They were not masters of this world, not yet, but apprentices, learning its language one hardship at a time. In a land ruled by ice and giants, survival meant more than strength. It demanded ingenuity, patience, and above all, adaptability. There were no forests to shelter them here, no trees to build homes or feed the flames, so they turned to the earth and to the bones of the beasts they hunted. In treeless valleys they raised shelters from the skeletons of mammoths, ribs forming arches, skulls stacked as walls, tusks braced together and draped with hides thick enough to hold back the screaming wind. Inside, the air was close and smoky, but warm. The light came from a single source, a flickering living heart. Fire. Fire was everything. It was protection, warmth, light, and life. Its glow marked the fragile boundary between safety and oblivion. Around it, families huddled close, wrapped in furs stitched together with bone needles and sinew thread. They roasted meat, mended tools, and whispered stories while the storm clawed at their walls of hide and bone. Outside was death. Inside, humanity endured. But fire alone could not feed them. To survive, they learned the art of the hunt, an art that required cooperation as much as courage. Their weapons were carved from stone, bone, and imagination. From riverbeds and cliffs, they gathered flint, shattering it into sharp, glittering blades. They fitted these to long spears of bone or wood, turning them into weapons capable of piercing the hides of mammoths and bison. Every strike, every flake chipped from stone, carried knowledge passed through generations. A map of motion and precision drawn in muscle memory rather than ink. A hunt was a test of more than skill. It was a measure of unity. Groups moved silently across the snow, reading the faintest signs: a broken tuft of grass, a trail pressed into frost. They drove herds toward cliffs or ambush points where others waited with raised spears. A single kill meant life for weeks. A failed hunt could mean hunger, frostbite, or death. Yet even amid such danger, humans created beauty. In caves far from daylight, they left images that still breathe today. Mammoths and bison painted in ochre and charcoal, horses mid-gallop, herds crossing plains that no longer exist. Sometimes the walls bore handprints, ghostly, human, eternal, as if reaching forward through time to say, "We were here." No one knows exactly why they painted. Perhaps it was ritual, a way to summon good fortune or honor the animals that fed them. Perhaps it was memory, or perhaps it was something simpler, something profoundly human. The need to leave a mark, to tell a story, even in a world made of ice. In the glow of the fire, creation and survival were one and the same. Every spark struck from flint was both warmth and meaning. Every tool shaped from bone was both necessity and art. And with each passing generation, humans grew bolder. They learned not only to endure the cold, but to shape it, to live with it, to use it, to master it. It was in these moments, huddled beneath hides and stars, that the first glimmers of human culture began to take form, not in cities or kingdoms, but in the quiet pulse of the firelight, where hands worked, voices whispered, and the wind outside carried the distant howls of wolves. The Ice Age was a world where danger was never far. It lived in the wind, in the snow, and in the silence beyond the firelight. Every shadow on the horizon might conceal eyes watching, muscles tensed, breath slow and patient. For in this frozen realm, humans were not the only hunters. Among the most feared were the saber-toothed cats, the icons of this age of giants. Their massive forelimbs were built for sudden bursts of strength, their jaws armed with fangs as long as a man's hand, blades of bone honed by evolution for a single perfect strike. They didn't chase, they waited. Hidden among low shrubs or crouched beside icy ravines, they let the herds pass within reach, and then, with terrifying precision, they leapt. Their attacks were short, explosive, and final. Few creatures escaped once the saber teeth committed to the kill. But they were not alone. Cave lions, nearly twice the size of their modern cousins, prowled the open plains. Unlike the solitary saber-tooth, they hunted together, moving with silent coordination across the steppe. A pride of cave lions could bring down even a young mammoth, their golden coats blending with the pale grasses as they fanned out in perfect formation. To see them in motion, low, fluid, relentless, was to witness the art of predation perfected. Then came the dire wolves, the gray phantoms of the Ice Age night. Heavier than modern wolves, their jaws could crush bone. They hunted in packs that stretched across the horizon, their haunting howls echoing through the frozen air. To the humans of that time, the sound was both warning and omen, a reminder that they were not alone in the darkness. Even smaller predators had their place. The wolverine, fierce and unyielding, would fight off animals many times its size for a scrap of meat. Foxes darted in and out of the edges of hunts, quick as ghosts, stealing what they could. Above them, ravens and vultures rode the cold winds, circling patiently over the plains until the snow turned red again. Humans were part of this chain, not above it. When they ventured out to hunt, they risked becoming prey themselves. A single mistake, a misstep on ice, a careless scent, could bring a lion's attention or a wolf pack's hunger. That constant danger shaped them. It taught them vigilance, cooperation, and the instinct to keep their fires burning through the night. The light of a campfire was more than warmth. It was defiance. A small circle of safety carved into the wilderness. The flames crackled and spat while beyond their reach the predators waited, eyes gleaming like stars in the dark. Over time, humans began to change the rules of the game. Their spears grew longer, their traps more clever. They learned that fire could be more than comfort. It could be weapon. A torch waved high was enough to drive off a lion or blind a wolf for a precious moment. Slowly, cautiously, humans transformed from hunted to rival. But this was no easy victory. It was an uneasy peace, a truce written in fear and necessity. Every creature, predator and prey alike, fought for survival under the same unforgiving sky. The cold did not favor one over another. It devoured the careless and rewarded only the alert. Perhaps, in living beside such formidable hunters, humans learned something deeper, that survival was not about strength alone, but unity. A lone person could vanish into the snow, forgotten by morning. But together, around the glow of a shared fire, they could endure. They could face the dark, listen to the distant growl of lions, and know that they were not powerless, only small for now. In that fragile glow, beneath the vastness of the Ice Age sky, humanity was being tempered, not conquered by fear, but refined by it. And with every night that passed, they drew one step closer to becoming the masters of the world that had once threatened to erase them. The Ice Age was a monument to scale, a world where everything seemed larger, stronger, and closer to myth. Every horizon was alive with movement, every shadow heavy with life. This was the age of the Titans, creatures so vast and strange that even now, they feel like dreams carved into bone. Across the endless grasslands, mammoths ruled like slow-moving mountains, their tusks curved skyward in gleaming arcs, sweeping the snow aside as they marched in family herds. Their shaggy fur rippled in the wind, their deep calls carrying through the cold like the echo of drums. Beside them walked the woolly rhinoceroses, broad-shouldered and armored in thick hair, their twin horns slicing through frost and wind alike. They shared the steppe with the steppe bison, great shaggy beasts that could darken the land as they moved, and wild horses, compact, muscular, their manes stiff with frost, galloping through the white haze of morning. Farther south, where the ice loosened its grip and forests began to spread, other titans thrived. Mastodons, smaller cousins of the mammoth, pulled bark from trees and crashed through the undergrowth. And lumbering among them were the giant ground sloths, creatures the size of small cars, their claws curling like sickles as they tore branches from the canopy. They moved slowly, deliberately, their fur matted with frost and dust, prehistoric phantoms from a gentler time surviving at the edge of a frozen age. But the giants were not alone. Wherever prey gathered, predators followed. The short-faced bear, towering over any bear alive today, stalked the plains of North America. It could outrun a galloping horse for a few desperate seconds, just long enough to strike. Even the air was alive with hunters, eagles and vultures, their wings black against the pale sky, circled endlessly over the ice, waiting for the moment the living became the dead. In the far reaches of the southern world, on the isolated continent of Australia, life had written its own strange stories. Giant kangaroos bounded across the plains, and marsupial lions, predators unlike anything else on Earth, ruled the shadows of the eucalyptus forests. Enormous, flightless birds, heavier than ostriches, stalked the open land, while massive reptiles, echoes of ancient eras, lurked in rivers and swamps, their armored hides gleaming like wet stone. Even the seas were filled with colossi. When the water receded during the height of the glaciation, it revealed vast new hunting grounds along the coasts, a frontier shared by early humans and marine hunters alike. In these cold, shallow seas grazed the Steller's sea cows, massive relatives of manatees feeding on thick kelp forests that once grew near the surface. And in the deep, dark waters beyond, ancient sharks and orcas prowled the edges of the continental shelves, their silent hunts mirroring the struggles above. Everywhere, life moved in patterns of abundance and danger. The Ice Age world was brutal, but it was also fertile, a paradox of cold and plenty. The vast grasslands fed by glacial dust produced endless grazing for herbivores, and the herbivores in turn sustained the predators. A living machine of balance, every part dependent on the others. It was an ecosystem both fragile and immense, a clockwork of hunger and survival ticking beneath skies of pale fire. And among it all, humans walked, smaller, weaker, yet aware in ways the giants were not. They watched the herds, learned their movements, and chose their moments with care. They hunted not with claws or fangs, but with foresight and fire. They studied the land like a book written in tracks and shadows. Each hunt was a conversation with death, measured, dangerous, necessary. A single mammoth could feed an entire clan. A single mistake could erase one. To live among such giants was to understand one's place, Small, temporary, but clever. The humans of the steppe did not dominate this world. They belonged to it as much as the wolves, the lions, and the birds that followed their trails. But their minds were already restless. They were learning, adapting, preparing for something that other creatures could not foresee. A change not just in climate, but in destiny. Because while the ice ruled the land and the giants ruled the plains, something new was stirring in the warmth of human thought, an ability to alter not only tools and tactics, but the balance of nature itself. And soon, as the planet began to thaw, the hunters who once feared the dark would become the most dangerous force the Ice Age had ever seen. The end of the Ice Age did not come with a roar. It came with a sigh. No single morning dawn to reveal a world reborn. Instead, the change crept in quietly, so slowly that generations might live and die without noticing the difference. A slightly longer summer, a slightly weaker frost, a river thawing a few weeks earlier than before. But those small shifts carried immense consequences. The vast glaciers, those sleeping beasts of ice that had ruled continents for tens of thousands of years, began to stir. Their edges softened, their great frozen bodies groaned under the weight of meltwater. Streams formed across their surfaces, first narrow rivulets, then roaring torrents that cut through the ice like blades. Each summer the trickle returned a little earlier. Each winter the freeze returned a little weaker. Then, one day, though no one saw it happen, the balance tipped. The glaciers began to retreat. Mile by mile, year by year, they withdrew. Their retreat carving valleys and leaving behind lakes so large they seemed like new seas. The sound of their collapse was the voice of the world remaking itself. Ice cracking like thunder, floods bursting forth with the force of oceans. Beneath the retreating ice, the land awakened. It had been buried in darkness for millennia, pressed flat under a weight beyond imagination. Now, freed from its prison, the earth began to breathe again. The ground heaved upward, slowly rebounding from the burden it had borne. Rivers twisted through the new valleys. Mosses and lichens were the first to arrive, clinging to stone and frost-bitten soil. Then came grasses, and then forests. Thin at first, then thick, until the once white horizon turned green. The air itself changed. Winds shifted, bringing warmer currents from the south. Rains fell in places that had known only snow. The sky cleared of dust, and sunlight touched the earth with a warmth it hadn't felt in ages. With the warmth came life in waves, insects, birds, small mammals, all racing to claim the reborn land. But not everything could adapt. The world of the Ice Age had been built upon the cold. As the glaciers retreated, the steppe that had stretched from France to Alaska began to vanish. Grasslands gave way to forests. The wide, open spaces that had sustained the mammoths and bison began to close in with trees and undergrowth. For the giants, it was a slow and merciless trap. The mammoths, the woolly rhinos, the great sloths, they had been made for wind and snow, not shade and humidity. Their food vanished, their range shrank, and one by one, the great herds began to disappear. Some fled north, chasing the cold that was slipping away. Others lingered until the last of the grass was gone. In the end, they stood alone in landscapes they no longer recognized, relics of a world that had melted out from under them. The predators, too, faced the same fate. Without herds to hunt, their numbers dwindled. The saber-tooths and cave lions, once rulers of the plains, vanished into silence. Even the dire wolves, unmatched hunters of the north, faded from the land they had once dominated. Only one species adapted to the change. Only one learned not to chase the cold, but to follow the warmth. Humans. Where the ice retreated, they advanced. They crossed rivers newly born from glacial melt, climbed valleys once buried under frozen walls, and spread into lands that had never known their kind. They fished the swelling rivers, hunted in the young forests, and learned to make homes not of bone, but of wood. The tools that had once killed mammoths were turned to building, shaping, and sewing. And slowly, imperceptibly, the age of the hunter gave way to the age of the settler. But even as the world softened, danger remained. The thaw brought chaos as well as creation. Rivers flooded, mountains crumbled, and the air carried storms that could drown entire valleys. The earth itself seemed restless, as if shaking off the long sleep of ice and remembering how to move again. Those who lived through it must have felt the unease, the ground trembling beneath their feet, the skies cracking open with unfamiliar warmth, the beasts of old growing scarce, the seasons shifting in ways no elder could predict. The Ice Age had shaped them, their bodies, their tools, their minds. And now, as it faded, they faced a new kind of challenge, to build a life not against the cold, but within the uncertain balance of change. The great glaciers were dying, but from their death, something new was being born, a world of forests, rivers, and human memory. The story of ice was ending, and the story of civilization was about to begin. The thaw did not just melt ice, it melted eras. With each passing century, the old world faded a little more. The glaciers that once defined the horizon were gone. The wind no longer howled across an endless plain of white. It whispered through forests of birch and pine. And in that transformation, the great beasts of the Ice Age, the ones that had ruled for millennia, began to vanish. At first, the change was subtle. A few fewer mammoths in the valleys, a herd that never returned to its grazing grounds, a winter with more rain than snow. But over time, those absences became a silence that spread across continents. The great mammoth steppe, once alive with movement and thunder, grew still. Some of the giants tried to follow the cold northward. Across Siberia and into the Arctic islands, small groups of mammoths wandered in search of their ancient home. They found the chill air they needed, but not the space. The ice had retreated too far, the land too small, the food too scarce. On Wrangel Island, a tiny population survived against all odds for thousands of years after their kin had vanished elsewhere. But even they could not escape the slow tide of change. Their bones, found today beneath the Arctic soil, mark the final heartbeat of a vanished world. For most of the great animals, the end came quickly. The woolly rhinoceros, once masters of the tundra plains, disappeared as the grass gave way to forests. The giant sloths of the Americas, slow and powerful, could not outlast the new predators that walked on two legs. And the saber-toothed cats, whose fangs had ruled the Ice Age plains, found themselves with nothing left to hunt. Even the mighty mastodons, ancient cousins of elephants, fell silent among the trees they once tore apart. The cold alone did not kill them. The warming world opened new paths for a species that had learned to hunt, to plan, and to think. A species that no longer needed to fear the dark. Where the giants struggled, humans flourished. Their tools grew sharper, their weapons deadlier, their minds hungrier. Everywhere they went, the pattern repeated. The mammoths retreated, and the fires followed. To the first hunters who watched these beasts, the world must have seemed infinite. They could not have known what extinction meant. Each hunt was a victory, a celebration, a triumph of survival. But one by one, their victories added up to absence. By the time their descendants realized the herds were gone, the landscape had changed forever. Still, the bond between humans and the great animals ran deep. They had been companions in survival, rivals in strength, mirrors of one another's endurance. Some tribes told stories of mammoths as spirits of the earth, creatures that slept beneath the mountains waiting to rise again. Others carved their likeness into bone and ivory, preserving their memory in art long after the creatures themselves were gone. As the mammoths disappeared, humans began to change too. They no longer followed herds across the frozen plains. They settled near rivers, where the soil, enriched by ancient dust, was soft enough to plant seeds. The first crops grew where glaciers once stood. The first villages rose on ground that mammoths had trampled. And the first civilizations began to write their history on the bones of the world the ice had left behind. It was not the end of nature's story, but the beginning of humanity's, and humanity's influence. The extinction of the Ice Age giants marked more than loss. It was the moment the balance of power shifted. For the first time in Earth's history, one species held the future of all others in its hands, and that power would shape everything that came next, from the rise of agriculture to the birth of myth, from the taming of fire to the building of cities. The last mammoth may have fallen silent on a lonely island in the Arctic, but its echo still moves within us, a reminder of what was and what can be lost again. Because the story of the Ice Age is not just about cold and survival, it's about transformation. It's about what happens when the world changes, and when those who live within it decide to change with it. Even after the glaciers withdrew and the last mammoths fell silent, the Ice Age never truly ended. Not in the memory of the world. Its fingerprints remain everywhere, in the carved lines of mountains, in the wandering courses of rivers, in the bones of the animals that once ruled, and in us, the species that learned to survive because of it. Look closely, and you can still see its mark. The fjords of Norway, the Great Lakes of North America, the rolling green hills of Europe, all shaped by ancient ice. The soil that feeds our crops was ground fine by glaciers. The valleys where cities now stand once lay beneath miles of frost. Even the winds and ocean currents we depend on today still follow paths the Ice Age first drew. But perhaps the truest legacy of that age lies within us. Our bodies remember the cold, how to store warmth, how to endure hunger, how to sleep through long darkness. Our cultures remember too, though we've turned those memories into stories. Myths of endless winters, of floods that swallowed lands, of gods who battled ice and fire, echoes of a world that froze, thawed, and lived again. Those stories were never just imagination. They were how we explained what we saw. The scars on the earth, the buried bones, the sudden warmth after endless snow. They were memory made myth. And even now, when we read them, we're hearing the faint voice of a planet that still carries the rhythm of its frozen heart. Because the Ice Age did not simply vanish. It changed form. It lives on in the cycles of our climate, in the slow breathing of the poles, in every glacier that melts, and every storm that grows stronger. The Earth still remembers, and so should we. What began with snow and silence has become something new. We stand now at the edge of another transformation, a warming world that carries the echoes of the last great thaw. And if we listen carefully to the memory of ice, it might tell us what comes next. There was one final shiver before the warmth could truly take hold, a sudden relapse into the past, a last defiant breath from the world of ice. It struck roughly 12,000 years ago in what scientists now call the Younger Dryas. Just as the Earth seemed ready to bloom, the cold surged back with brutal speed. Glaciers halted their retreat, the winds sharpened, and spring itself seemed to hesitate at the threshold. For more than a millennium, the planet lingered in suspense. The warmth withdrew. Grasslands browned and died beneath the returning frost. For the living, it was a cruel reversal, one more trial of endurance after millennia of struggle. But even that final grasp of winter could not last forever. When the ice finally surrendered, it did so in a rush. The thaw began again, faster and fiercer than before. Rivers swelled with meltwater. Seas rose. Whole regions that had been open ground only decades before vanished beneath the waves. The great land bridges, the arteries that had once bound continents together, slipped beneath the rising oceans. Beringia, the vast plain that once linked Asia to North America, drowned beneath the new Bering Strait. Doggerland, that wide, fertile hunting ground between Britain and Europe, disappeared under the swelling North Sea. As the warmth returned, the world changed color. Forests advanced northward, creeping over the grasslands of the Mammoth Steppe. Birch, pine, and larch replaced the open tundra. For the great beasts that had thrived in cold and space, it was like watching the walls close in. Some adapted. Most did not. But for humans, this shift was a gift. The retreat of the glaciers revealed new lands, rich valleys, clear rivers, deep soils ripe for growth. People followed the meltwater trails, settling near lakes and streams carved by the hands of ice. They were no longer wanderers chasing herds. They were becoming something else, the first settlers of a warming world. Even so, the glaciers never truly disappeared. They left their memory everywhere, in ridges of gravel, in silted plains, in valleys that became rivers. The ice had drawn the map of tomorrow. The same cold that once threatened extinction had sculpted the foundations of the world to come. The Ice Age was fading, but not quietly. The frozen giants still had one last performance left, a series of cataclysmic floods that would tear across continents and rewrite the earth. The end of the Ice Age did not arrive with silence. It came with thunder. The ice, melting from within, did not simply fade into streams. It broke apart violently, unleashing floods so vast they would reshape the very bones of the continents. Beneath, and within, the collapsing glaciers, meltwater gathered in enormous hidden chambers, lakes trapped behind walls of frozen mass that had stood unbroken for millennia. When those walls finally gave way, the earth roared. These were not mere floods. They were cataclysms, rivers hundreds of miles wide, racing with the strength of oceans, tearing valleys into stone and drowning entire plains in a matter of days. In North America, one such colossus lay beneath the retreating Laurentide ice sheet, Glacial Lake, Agassiz, a body of water larger than all 5 Great Lakes combined. For centuries it slept, its surface calm beneath a lid of ice and silt. But ice is not forever. When its frozen dam failed, the lake burst forth with a force that defies imagination. Water thundered across the land, turning small rivers into raging walls of foam and rock. Entire valleys vanished beneath the surge. Boulders the size of houses rolled like pebbles. The flood cut deep scars into the bedrock. Scars still visible today. The torrents did not stop there. They poured into the oceans, raising sea levels across the globe. And with every surge, the planet's climate shifted. The wind patterns changed. The oceans breathed differently, and warmth began to spread unevenly. A planet reshaping itself in real time. This was not a single event, but a rhythm. A heartbeat of collapse and renewal. Around the edges of the shrinking ice, other hidden lakes waited their turn. Some broke loose in sudden bursts, others drained slowly, carving new rivers that still flow through our maps and our lives. The Columbia River Gorge, the monumental canyons of the Pacific Northwest, owe their shape to these floods. Waves of destruction so immense they swept through the same valleys again and again, each time deepening, widening, sculpting the earth as if by the hands of ancient gods. Across Europe, similar dramas unfolded. As the glaciers retreated, vast lakes swelled in the lowlands. When their icy borders failed, they too carved new waterways and shifted the courses of ancient rivers. Even in Siberia, enormous glacial lakes burst their walls, their waters racing across the tundra, transforming plains into basins and deserts into seas. For the humans who lived through these moments, the world itself must have seemed alive, angry, unpredictable, and unstoppable. Villages and hunting grounds could vanish overnight. Lands once rich with game became lifeless lagoons. And yet, as always, people adapted. When the waters withdrew, they left behind new gifts. Fertile plains glistening with mineral-rich soil, river valleys ripe for settlement, and lakes that would anchor the next chapter of human life. Some of these lakes endured, becoming the freshwater giants we still know. Superior, Michigan, Huron, their waters filling the scars of ice. Others vanished as quickly as they appeared, their ghostly shorelines still traced in the hills. To those who watched these changes unfold, the earth must have seemed alive in a way both beautiful and terrifying, forever shifting, forever being reborn. These floods marked the true twilight of the Ice Age. Each torrent tore away another piece of that frozen empire, until only fragments of it remained clinging to the poles. But even as the waters reshaped the continents, another story was emerging, one written in bone, fur, and silence. The age of giants was ending, and the world that replaced it would never be the same. As the ice withdrew and the world softened, the old rulers began to fade. The mammoths, the woolly rhinoceroses, the towering sloths, the saber-toothed predators that once stalked the steppes, all found themselves strangers in a changing world. For tens of thousands of years, they had thrived in a frozen Eden, a realm of cold winds, dry grasses, and endless space. They had evolved for endurance, for power, for a rhythm that matched the slow heart of the Ice Age itself. But when that rhythm broke, their world began to unravel. The first wound came from the climate. As glaciers retreated, forests advanced. What had once been boundless plain turned into tangled woodland. The vast mammoth steppe, the heart of their existence, shrank with every passing century. Trees claimed the grasslands. Canopies closed over once open skies. For creatures born to roam, it was suffocation. The tough, low grasses that had fed them for millennia disappeared under leaves and shade. The mammoths, built for the wind and open light, found themselves penned between rivers and trees. The woolly rhinoceroses and the steppe bison followed the same path, their herds thinning, their ranges fracturing, their silence spreading across the plains. The predators, too, began to falter. The dire wolves, the cave lions, the saber-toothed cats, all dependent on the abundance of great prey, found their world shrinking around them. As the herds vanished, so did they. Bit by bit, the intricate web that had sustained life in the frozen age began to come undone. But the ice and the forests were not the only forces closing in. Humanity had arrived. Armed with the fire of intelligence and the patience of generations, humans spread into every corner of the planet. They had learned to read the land, to track, to ambush, to endure. A group of hunters armed with stone-tipped spears could bring down a mammoth, something once unthinkable. At first it was rare, a desperate act of survival. But as populations grew and weapons sharpened, the balance shifted. The hunters became a new kind of predator, one that worked together, planned, and never stopped. In the frozen soils of Siberia, archaeologists still find mammoth bones scarred by human tools, and spearheads buried deep within ribs and skulls. In North America, kill sites tell the same story. Carcasses stripped clean, bones cracked open for marrow, the mark of a species learning mastery over giants. The mammoths had survived cold, hunger, and predators of every kind. But they could not survive a thinking hunter. The world was warming, their food was fading, and now the most adaptable creature of all was walking the same ground. Still, extinction did not strike like lightning. It crept across the continents in waves. In Australia, the great marsupial beasts disappeared early, long before the northern glaciers had melted. In the Americas, mammoths and saber-tooths lingered until the very end, until climate and humanity together pushed them past the brink. Some held on longer than others. On a remote island in the Arctic called Wrangel, a few mammoths survived thousands of years after their kin were gone from the mainland. They grew smaller, weaker, a ghostly echo of their former selves. But they endured, hidden away at the edge of the world, until at last their time ran out. Their end was not just the loss of great beasts. It was the end of an entire way of life. Without the herds to graze the plains, grasses grew wild, then died beneath forests. Predators vanished or turned to smaller prey. The wide, open landscapes of the Ice Age gave way to quieter, greener worlds. Worlds that no longer had room for giants. Yet the legacy of those creatures never vanished entirely. The bison still wander the plains, descendants of that vanished steppe. The muskox, heavy and defiant, still endures on the tundra, a living fragment of a colder time. Even the elephants carry whispers of mammoths in their blood, their lineage unbroken through the ages. The Ice Age did not end with a single moment of silence. It ended with the fading of footsteps, with the echo of trumpets lost to the wind, with the last breath of creatures that had once made the earth tremble beneath their weight. But in their passing, something new began. With the giants gone, and the glaciers retreating, the world opened its eyes to light and color once again. A world ready for its next chapter, and for a new kind of power to rise, humanity's. When the last of the great beasts vanished and the glaciers withdrew, the world began to breathe again. The sharp edges of the Ice Age softened, the light changed, and the air grew heavy with the scent of water and growing things. What had once been a continent of ice and wind turned green. The rivers, swollen with meltwater, carved new paths through the earth. Where glaciers had gouged deep scars, lakes now shimmered. Forests crept northward, birch and pine first, bold pioneers, followed by oak, elm, and maple. In just a few thousand years, the endless white plains of the mammoth steppe were gone, replaced by canopies of leaves whispering in a warmer breeze. Life rushed to fill the emptiness. Deer and boar wandered into the new woods. Wolves followed, silent shadows adapting to hunt among the trees. Birdsong returned to places that had known only the howl of wind. The world was rebuilding itself, layer by layer, root by root. Humans changed, too. They no longer followed herds across frozen plains. They lingered by rivers, by lakes, beneath sheltering trees. They built camps that lasted through seasons, then through years. They learned the patience of seeds. They noticed which plants returned each spring and began to scatter them intentionally. What had once been wild chance slowly became design. The rhythm of life itself was shifting. The furious cycle of brief summers and endless winters eased. Spring stretched longer. Autumn lingered. The earth no longer demanded constant movement. It invited settlement, reflection, invention. In this gentler world, people began to imagine permanence. They carved fields into the land. They shaped stone not just for spears, but for grinding grain. They built storage pits, shelters, villages. The first sparks of civilization flickered at the edge of the receding cold. The world, once carved by glaciers, was now shaped by human hands. And yet, even in this green rebirth, the memory of the Ice Age lingered. Every valley, every fertile plain, every shimmering lake was a gift of that frozen past. The soil itself was born of its patience and pressure. The same cold that had nearly ended life had, in the end, made it possible to flourish. The Ice Age was over, but it had not been defeated. It had transformed, leaving behind a living monument, a planet ready for the next great experiment, the age of humanity. The Ice Age never truly vanished. It only changed its shape. Even as the world grew green and warm, its fingerprints remained everywhere, written into the land, the water, and the bones of living things. Look at the map of our planet today, and you'll see its traces. The deep, glacial valleys of Scandinavia and New Zealand, the long blue scars of the Great Lakes, the smooth, rolling plains of North America and Northern Europe. All of them are children of ice. The glaciers carved them patiently, scraping, grinding, sculpting over thousands of years. They carried mountains on their backs, and when they melted, they left those stones scattered like forgotten toys. Glacial erratics, giant boulders resting where no mountain stands. Each one marks a journey that ended long before human memory began. Beneath our feet, the soil itself carries the story. The finest, richest farmland on Earth, from the plains of China to the valleys of Europe to the American Midwest, was born from the dust of glaciers. Ground rock, carried by wind and water, settled into thick blankets of fertile loess. Every harvest that rises from those fields is a gift from an age that ended 10,000 years ago. The fingerprints of the Ice Age reach even deeper, into the ice itself. Far below the frozen deserts of Greenland and Antarctica, layers of ancient snow lie compressed into crystal time. Each band of ice holds a breath of the world as it once was, bubbles of air, dust from long-dead volcanoes, traces of pollen. Scientists drill into these frozen archives, pulling up cylinders of ice that speak in whispers, telling us when the world froze, when it thawed, and how fragile the balance has always been. And there is the land, still changing, still rising where the glaciers once pressed it down. In Scandinavia and Canada, the Earth slowly lifts itself, an ancient rebound from the weight of vanished ice. Every year, the ground climbs a little higher, as if remembering the freedom of lightness for the first time. Even the animals bear its mark. The bison that roam the plains, the musk oxen that graze the tundra, the caribou and reindeer that cross the frozen north. All carry the blood of survivors, species that learned endurance in the long winter. And so do we. Our ancestors crossed frozen bridges between continents. They hunted mammoths, built shelters of bone, and found warmth where there should have been none. They carried fire and language across the world the ice had reshaped. The strength they learned there, patience, unity, invention, is still written in us. When we look at a valley, when we trace a river or climb a mountain, we are walking through the memory of the Ice Age. It is the unseen architect of our planet, and in many ways, the first teacher of humanity. The glaciers have gone, but their story remains beneath every step we take. Even now, the earth whispers with the voice of ice. Every river that winds its way to the sea follows paths carved by melting glaciers. Every coastline, every cliff and ridge bears the invisible fingerprint of frozen centuries long past. The mountains still carry the scars, smooth, U-shaped valleys where ice once slid like slow thunder. In the Alps, in Patagonia, in the far Canadian Shield, you can stand at the edge of those glacial bowls and feel how the planet once moved, not in years, but in ages. The silence there is the same silence the first humans knew. The oceans too, remember. Their levels rise and fall in time with the pulse of the planet. When the glaciers grew, the seas retreated, revealing new continents. When they melted, the waters returned, swallowing land and legend alike. Beneath the North Sea lie the drowned plains of Doggerland, once home to forests, animals, and people. In the Bering Strait, the ghost of Beringia still sleeps beneath the waves, a vanished world that once linked Asia and America. For thousands of years, stories of lost lands and rising floods were passed down in myths and memories, echoes of a truth far older than any civilization. Perhaps those tales of deluge, of worlds swallowed by the sea, are the final voices of people who watched the Ice Age end. But the story of ice is not only one of destruction, it is one of creation, of rebirth. The glaciers sculpted the framework of our world, but it was water that filled it with life. The rivers they birthed became arteries of civilization. Along their banks, humans planted the first seeds, built villages, then cities. The valleys, carved by the cold, became the cradles of warmth and culture. And yet, the ice still moves. High in the Himalayas, in Greenland, in Antarctica, it breathes with the slow rhythm of the earth. Every crack and creak of a glacier is a reminder that the past is not gone. It only sleeps beneath the snow. The Ice Age lives on in more than just stone and water. It lives in us, in the stories we tell of endurance and change, in our fear of cold and our reverence for fire in the instinct that drives us to adapt, to survive, to remember. For though the glaciers have retreated, the memory of their touch remains eternal. The world we know, its valleys, its rivers, its balance, was shaped by their patient hand. And one day, perhaps, when the balance shifts again, the ice will return, and the earth will remember how to breathe frost. The Ice Age may have ended, but the story of ice has never truly closed. The earth moves in long, slow cycles, a rhythm so vast that we measure it not in centuries, but in the tilts of the planet itself. The same dance of orbit and sunlight that once plunged the world into frozen silence still continues, unseen, unhurried. The axis wobbles, the orbit stretches and tightens, and the seasons shift, ever so slightly, in a pattern that repeats across hundreds of millennia. These cosmic mechanics, the Milankovitch cycles, are the breath of the earth. They whisper that winter and summer are not only seasons but eras, that the warmth we live in now is only an interlude, a brief pause between deep freezes. If you could watch the planet from afar, sped up through time, you'd see it inhale and exhale ice. White caps bloom from the poles, then melt back into blue. Forests spread, deserts fade, and then the frost returns, reclaiming its empire. Even now, far to the north and south, the remnants of that frozen age wait. The ice sheets of Greenland and Antarctica hold 2/3 of all fresh water on Earth. They rise like sleeping giants, their weight bending the crust beneath them, their silence deceiving. Within them are rivers that never see the sun, valleys older than the pyramids, and air from a time before our kind. And though the world is warming now, the balance of ice and fire has always been fragile. For every rise in heat, there comes a reckoning, a slow recalibration of the planet's breath. The glaciers, if they vanish, will rewrite the Earth again. Oceans climbing higher, winds shifting, currents bending in new directions. Perhaps, in a far future, long after our cities have turned to dust, the pendulum will swing back. The air will cool. Snow will fall and never melt. The forests will shrink, and ice will begin its march once more. It will come quietly at first, one winter colder than the last, a pattern no one will see until it is too late to name. Then the white horizon will stretch farther each year. The old rivers will freeze, the seas will retreat, and the world will remember its ancient rhythm. The next ice age will not be an ending. It will be a renewal, a return to balance. Because the earth does not destroy, it transforms. Every melt and freeze, every rise and fall of water and stone is a heartbeat in the life of a living planet. And when that day comes, when the frost begins its slow descent again, some future voice, perhaps human, perhaps not, will stand beneath a pale sky and tell stories of the time when the world was green, and they will speak of us, the ones who lived in the warmth, who walked between the ages of ice. If the earth could dream, its dreams would be carved in ice and written in dust. Each age, each storm, each trembling shift of stone would leave its signature on the skin of the planet. A quiet reminder that nothing ever truly ends. It only transforms. Long after our voices fade, the earth will remember. It will remember the thunder of the glaciers, the deep, grinding patience that shaped its valleys and plains. It will remember the roar of meltwater floods, the breath of mammoths steaming in the dawn, and the small fires of humankind flickering against the dark. We are, all of us, part of that memory, a single heartbeat in the long pulse of creation. The bones of our ancestors rest beside those of mammoths and lions buried in the same earth the ice once ruled. Our cities rise from stone once scoured by frozen rivers. Our fields thrive on the soil the glaciers left behind. Even the air we breathe carries traces of that ancient cold, molecules of the same sky that froze above the Pleistocene world. Every snowfall is a whisper from that past. Every mountain stream is a fragment of glacier reborn. The wind that moves across the plains has crossed the same distance since before memory began. We live inside a story the planet has been telling for eons, a story of endurance, transformation, and return. The Ice Age was never only an age of frost. It was the Earth learning to sculpt, to breathe, to renew. It carved beauty from desolation, shaped strength from hardship, and taught life how to adapt, how to endure change itself. And perhaps that is its final gift to us, because we too now stand at the edge of change. The ice may be retreating again, but its lesson remains. The world is fragile, yes, but it is also resilient. It forgets nothing. Every choice we make, every flame we light becomes part of its next remembering. So when you stand beneath a cold sky, when snow drifts quietly against the windows, listen. That silence you hear is not emptiness. It is memory. The echo of glaciers still moving in the bones of the earth, a faint reminder that time is vast and patient, and that even the coldest age can give birth to warmth. Because the Ice Age was not only a past we left behind, it was the beginning of everything that followed, and somewhere beneath the quiet hum of the modern world, its heart still beats.